My name is Michael, and what I'm about to share with you is a tale so haunting, so deeply unsettling, that it still sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. It's a story that took place on the infamous Poveglia Island, a place with a dark and horrifying history that continues to echo through time. It all began a few years ago when I, along with a small group of adventurous friends, decided to explore Poveglia Island. We had heard the chilling stories about the island's past, tales of plague victims, mental asylums, and restless spirits. But we were young and fearless, or so we thought. Poveglia Island sits like a forgotten blot in the Venetian lagoon, just off the coast of Venice, Italy. Its reputation as one of the most haunted places on Earth was not without reason. The island had been a quarantine station for plague victims in the 18th century, a mental asylum in the 20th, and, some say, a dumping ground for the remains of those who had perished in both institutions. The island's eerie isolation was emphasized by the dense fog that blanketed it as our small boat approached. It was a scene right out of a horror movie, with gnarled trees, crumbling buildings, and an air of malevolence that seemed to cling to every inch of the place. We disembarked onto the desolate shore, our footsteps echoing ominously in the eerie silence. As we explored, we couldn't help but feel that we were being watched, that the spirits of the past were scrutinizing our every move. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came when we entered the remains of the asylum. The walls were covered in graffiti, but the messages were not what you'd expect. They were pleas for help, cries of torment, and desperate scribblings from those who had clearly lost their minds. It was as if the very walls were alive with the suffering that had occurred within these walls. As we delved deeper into the decaying building, we began to hear faint whispers. At first, we dismissed them as the wind playing tricks on our ears, but they grew louder and more distinct. The voices seemed to be coming from all around us, and they were pleading, begging for release from their torment. We rushed to leave the asylum, but the door that had been opened just moments before was now firmly shut, and no amount of pushing or kicking would budge it. Panic set in as the voices grew more insistent, their cries echoing in our heads. Just when we thought we were trapped forever, the door creaked open, and we stumbled out into the blinding sunlight. Gasping for breath, we vowed to leave the island and never return, but the spirits of Poveglia had other plans. That night, as we tried to sleep in our rented cottage on the nearby mainland, we heard footsteps in the hallway, soft and deliberate. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the bedroom door. The hallway was empty, but I could feel a presence, a malevolent force lurking just beyond my sight. As I crept down the hallway, the temperature dropped, and my breath formed frosty clouds in the air. I turned the corner and found myself face to face with a specter, a woman in a tattered white gown, her eyes vacant and hollow. She raised her bony finger and pointed at me, her voice a chilling whisper. "Leave this place," she hissed, "before it consumes you." I stumbled back into the bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it. My friends had heard the commotion and were now wide awake, their faces as pale as mine. I tried to convince them that we needed to leave immediately, but they were paralyzed by fear. That night, the hauntings escalated. We heard the wails of the damned, the agonized screams of the tormented, and the relentless footsteps that seemed to stalk us through the cottage. Shadows moved in the corners of our vision, and the air grew heavy with an otherworldly presence. One by one, my friends began to experience disturbing visions. Sarah saw the ghostly figure of a plague doctor, his beak-like mask obscuring his face as he extended a bony hand toward her. Mark was visited by the spirit of a deranged patient from the asylum, her wild eyes staring into his soul. And David claimed to have seen the twisted, contorted faces of the plague victims, their mouths agape in silent agony. We were trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape the relentless onslaught of the supernatural. Desperation set in as we searched for a way to break free from the island's grip. It was then that we found the old diary, hidden away in a dusty drawer. The diary belonged to a doctor who had worked on Poveglia during the plague outbreak. His entries chronicled the horrors he had witnessed, the screams of the dying, the piles of bodies, and the unending despair that had consumed the island. But there was one entry that sent chills down our spines. "I have made a terrible mistake," the doctor had written. "I have conducted experiments on the living and the dead, attempting to unlock the secrets of life and death. I fear I have unleashed something unspeakable, a malevolent force that now haunts this cursed place. I pray that no one else will suffer as we have." It was a grim revelation, but it offered a glimmer of hope. If the doctor's experiments had indeed unleashed a malevolent force, perhaps there was a way to appease it, to put the restless spirits to rest. With trembling hands, we gathered what supplies we could find and made our way back to the asylum. Armed with candles, salt, and the doctor's diary, we ventured deep into the heart of the building, guided by the voices of the tormented souls. In a long-forgotten chamber beneath the asylum, we found a blood-stained table and a collection of old, rusted surgical instruments. It was here that the doctor had conducted his grotesque experiments, and it was here that we would attempt to appease the malevolent force. We lit the candles and formed a circle, chanting words from the diary in a desperate attempt to communicate with the spirits. The air grew thick with tension, and the temperature dropped to an icy chill. The room seemed to come alive with a malevolent energy, and we felt a presence, a dark and looming presence, closing in on us. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the haunting ceased. The room grew still, and the voices of the tormented spirits faded into a distant whisper. It was over. We had appeased the malevolent force, and the island fell into an eerie silence. Exhausted and shaken, we made our way back to the mainland, vowing never to speak of our harrowing experience on Poveglia Island. It was a place of unspeakable horror, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred, and where the sins of the past continued to haunt the present. To this day, I cannot forget the haunting of Poveglia Island. The memories of that night still haunt my dreams, and I know that the spirits of the island will forever linger in the shadows, waiting for their next unsuspecting victims. If you ever find yourself drawn to the dark and forbidden, heed my warning and stay far away from Poveglia, for the malevolent force that dwells there is not to be trifled with.